this issue of the of Zionism and the way that the Zionists have a stranglehold on not only the U.S. Government, but governments around the world, is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. It's the main topic I've been covering on my channel since 2013. So the development today is a significant one. So, we can mark this on our calendars as a major event. November 18th, 2019, we saw Secretary of State Mike Pompeo go out on behalf of President Trump, and Pompeo announced a major change in the United States position on Israel's illegal settlements. Now, from the perspective of most Americans who don't know anything about it, it's like, who cares? Sounds like a boring topic. But from the perspective of the people who are the most under the heel of the boots of the Zionists, and I'm talking about the Palestinians and the Arab states surrounding Israel, there in the Levant in general, this decision today was one of monumental importance, a terrible development. And so, because this is so significant, I'm going to go ahead and take some time tonight. Let's shoot for an hour and, go through the basics of this issue. And I'm going to talk about the settlements. I'm going to explain it dispassionately, and we're just going to go through the facts. Let me pull up some photos here. I do want to share a couple pictures as we go along. Okay, so in 1948, this is kind of how the map looked. We know that in 1948, Israel declared its independence. They used British and American weaponry, tanks and so forth, to go in and drive out 1 million of the native Palestinians, people that were just living in their own towns, people who either they or their ancestors had lived continuously in these towns and villages for over 1,000 years. So Israel didn't just go and pick a couple places. It was a campaign of ethnic cleansing. They drove out over 1 million people from more than 500 towns and villages throughout this territory. And again, this is, it's kind of like take the everything that happened with the Native Americans here in the United States and how we pushed them out. But instead of spreading it over a long period of decades, imagine doing this just in a period of months. This was a massive assault. Now, according to the original UN partition plan, if we look at this next screen here, this is kind of how the land was divided up based on the UN's proposal for how to do this. And that's kind of what started this off. Originally, the territory in green, which, as you can see, is considerably more than what the Palestinians have access to today. The green was to be the Palestinian state. The blue was to be the Israeli state. Now, we can't zoom in close enough to see it, and this picture wouldn't show it anyway, but the little area where Jerusalem is, Jerusalem, because it was so desired by both sides, and there was no way to work it out, what had been proposed by the United Nations and pretty much everybody was that Jerusalem would not go to the Palestinians or the Jews exclusively, but it would remain its own state, its own city. It would be an international city. Now, that's what the UN proposed. Now, you can understand that from the Palestinian perspective, who the hell are these people, the United Nations, to come in and take half our land and give it away to other people and then tell us that the city of Jerusalem, which we've been in for 1,000 years, is not ours anymore. So, understandably, the Palestinians did not accept this proposal. This was 100% for the benefit of the Zionists. 100% for the Rothschilds who wanted this outpost from which they could go in and start taking control of the resources there in the Levant. Now, while it was a good idea, I guess hypothetically, for Jerusalem to not go strictly to the Jews or strictly to the Arabs, to the Palestinians, the reality is that after Israel declared their independence in 1948, they essentially conduct a blitzkrieg, and they go in and they try and grab all of Jerusalem for themselves. They say, screw this, Jerusalem is ours, we're taking it. Now, the neighbor here of Israel, since the Palestinians did not have a state of their own, the closest state was Jordan. And so, in fact, the eastern part of Jerusalem was so what happens is Jordan exerted control. They go in as the Israelis go in to try and take control of all of Jerusalem for themselves, for their state. Jordan rushes in, and this Arab coalition, they fight them off, and they prevent the Jews from taking all of Jerusalem. And so Jordan takes control over East Jerusalem, effectively on the behalf of the Muslim and Christian Palestinians who had been worshiping there for, centuries. So it's important to understand that while the Jews did take control of West Jerusalem, they did not take control of East Jerusalem at this time. It wasn't theirs. So East Jerusalem is the area of the old city where you've got the old Temple Mount that had been where the Al-Aqsa Mosque had been built many, many centuries ago, and was the prime location of Palestinian worship, at least the Muslim worship. But also this area of East Jerusalem, the old city, this is where, remember, the Christians had a strong presence here as well. Christian Palestinians were a significant presence at this time. And to them, these holy sites in East Jerusalem were important to them as well. And the Jews wanted to take control of all of these holy sites from the Christian Palestinians also. Now, if we skip forward to 1967, that year ought to be familiar to you, because that is the year that Israel killed 58 of our American sailors aboard the USS Liberty when they tried to draw the United States into a war against Egypt. It was a false flag attack. They wanted to sink the USS Liberty so that the Liberty could not, which was a spy ship, surveillance vessel, they didn't want the Liberty to discover their plans, and in fact they thought that they already had discovered their plans to launch an offensive operation to go steal land from Syria and so forth. So the plan was sink the Liberty, kill all the people, a couple hundred sailors, kill them all, put the Liberty down into the bottom of the ocean, and make it look like Israel did it. Make it look like Egypt did it. Because back at this time, their biggest enemy, Israel's biggest regional enemy, was Egypt. More so than Jordan. So, in 1967, and they attacked. They launched this attack where they invaded Egypt, Israel invaded Syria, and Israel invaded Jordan. And again, they did this not just because they're just so great. They did it with the heavy financial and military support of the Western colonial powers. And so they made huge gains. Let me show you this next photo here. They made massive gains. So we can see here the change in the territory. So what Israel did was they established control over, they set up a military occupation of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, which is a vast swath of land. They took control of Syria's Golan Heights up there, just kind of southeast of Lebanon, the kind of the western corner of Syria there. They took control of the Golan Heights. And they also went in and they took control of East Jerusalem, which is where the area that Jordan had been in control of. And they essentially occupied the West Bank and everything. They just took all of it. Now, under international law, the way that it works, people just repeat this line, "Oh, to the victor goes the spoils." That's a very archaic, medieval kind of mentality. That's not how nations of the world today do it. The way that it works under international law is that military occupations are to be temporary, not permanent. And we see this, for example, with the ongoing hostility of pretty much all of the Western world toward Russia regarding Russia's annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, and also their involvement in the eastern part of Ukraine, there in Donetsk, Luhansk, and that area. They say, you can't do this, you can't annex it, you're not allowed to. That's what America says. That's what Britain says. You can't do that, Russia. But when it comes to Israel, sure, they can annex land, no problem. Why? Because we're bros with Israel. We're all just one big happy international banking clan controlled confederation. So, under international law, military occupations are supposed to be temporary. You go in, there's a war, fine. There's a conflict, fine. The two sides meet, they fight. This side loses, this side comes in and occupies the territory. But it is only supposed to be sustained to the degree necessary for peaceful relations to be reestablished and a cessation of major hostilities. There still may be some little, individual skirmishes or whatever, but once the major hostilities are over, you withdraw the military. At most, you leave a few military bases or outposts in place where it is strategically necessary to prevent that other nation from attacking you back or whatever. Defensive positions. So it is a major violation of international law to transfer, while you are military occupying another territory, to take your citizens and transfer them into that occupied territory. You can't do that. To the victor does not go the spoils. We have progressed to the point internationally where there is some semblance of civility even in wartime. There are certain parameters, certain conventions that certain lines that you don't cross. Well, eventually Israel releases control of the Sinai back to Egypt, mostly because of the international condemnation. They release the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt. Plus, honestly, most of the Sinai Peninsula is desert, uninhabited, uninhabitable, a good deal of it, undeveloped. Not really anything worth holding on to, so they let it go. But Israel never ended their military occupation of Syria's Golan Heights or Jordan's territory of East Jerusalem. So this ongoing military occupation is an outright violation of not only the international laws, but also its own legal rulings. Because if we go back and we can look at the records that have been that are available, and you can see that shortly after Israel declared its independence in 1948, Israel's own Supreme Court ruled that the new state of Israel was to accept international law, international norms, that these international laws were binding upon Israel, and that the laws were to be incorporated into Israel's domestic laws. Now, as a result of these hostile actions by Israel toward the Palestinians in 1948, 1949 that violated those international laws, the international community got together in the Fourth Geneva Convention, and they produced Article 49, which states, in fact, I think I've got a screenshot of part of it here. Give me a second. Yeah, here we go. Okay, Article 49 states, quote, "The occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies." Now, since 1949, the international community has not just said this once or twice, it has been over and over and over and over. They have been unified. All the nations of the planet have been unified in condemning Israel's occupation. They say it is illegal. They have said it is illegal over and over again. The United Nations Security Council has repeatedly issued proclamations saying that this occupation violates international law. The UN's General Assembly has said repeatedly this violates international law. The International Court of Justice has ruled against Israel. The International Committee of the Red Cross has said this violates the Geneva Convention. And the Geneva Convention members themselves have said this, Israel is trying to weasel out of it and say, oh, well, we're not officially transferring our citizens as part of official government policy, so we're okay. But the Geneva Convention that wrote Article 49 has said, bullcrap, you are in violation of it, no matter how you want to spin it. Let me show you one. Let me bring this up on my screen here, and I'm going to make sure and recognize everybody that has made a super chat donation. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys supporting me, because you know when we talk about this topic, how much risk it carries. Here, as soon as this article pops up, I'm going to show it to you. I'm a little bit slow here. Okay. So this is a BBC article from 2008. And this is as recent as the Obama administration. Every nation on earth, every single nation on earth, has been united in condemning Israel's occupation. And so you can read here, for example, in this article, it says, quote, "The British government believes that Israeli settlements on occupied territory are illegal. So does every other government in the world except Israel." So when we look at today's development, it is significant. It really says a lot about Donald Trump's loyalties, that he is the first leader of any nation anywhere in the world since Israel was founded in 1948. So 71 years. Donald Trump is the first person to break away from the international consensus and take the position that, screw all of that Geneva Convention stuff. There's nothing wrong. Israel's occupation isn't necessarily illegal. This speaks to the depth of devotion that President Trump has to Benjamin Netanyahu and to the Jewish political donors like Sheldon Adelson, who have used Donald Trump like a puppet to co-opt U.S. policy and to turn our nation into a vassal of the Zionist state of Israel. It is stunning. It raises questions in my mind of the president's loyalty to our nation itself. Because for 71 years, the U.S. Congress, both parties, Democrat and Republican, presidents of both parties, consistently since the beginning of these settlements, they have all been united in saying this is wrong. Donald Trump is the first person in the world to break with that. That doesn't make him some great maverick. That makes him a tool. Forget Russiagate. Forget these ideas that Donald Trump is a tool of Vladimir Putin. He should have been investigated for selling out to Israel, but because of the Israeli lobby's control over our Congress, you know they would never go after Trump for that. If there was anything that Donald Trump ought to be impeached for, it is for this. It is for the way that he has sold America's interests out to Israel. It is for things like fairly recently the United States discovering that Israel was conducting espionage there at the White House. Yet again, they've been caught many times in the past, but here they go again. Listening devices designed to, 4 listening devices inside the White House. 4 listening devices. Israeli, to spy on us. And what did Donald Trump do? Had this been China or Iran or Venezuela and the U.S. government discovered that one of those nations had 4 listening devices recording and transmitting the phone calls of the president or other staffers there under the president, what do you think Donald Trump would have done? But what did he do with Israel? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It really makes you wonder, why does he do this? Why is he like this? Is it that they have some kind of compromise? Did Jeff Epstein get something on him in all those years that they were buddies partying together? Did Epstein convey that to the Mossad? Has Netanyahu done to Trump what Netanyahu did to Clinton? Remember, I believe I covered this. I don't know if I did it on this channel or my other one, but I went in depth about how Benjamin Netanyahu went and met President Clinton before the Lewinsky scandal broke. And he said to Clinton, guess what? I have taped recordings. I have over 60 hours of conversations between you and Monica Lewinsky, which was a good deal of phone sex going on. And Netanyahu told Clinton, you know, I really want one of our spies to be let go. You got him in prison. And that was used as leverage over Clinton. So let's not pretend like Israel doesn't have the will to do this, to compromise one of our presidents. They certainly do. And specifically Benjamin Netanyahu. You cannot look at what Donald Trump does with regard to, set aside everything else. Forget the wall, forget immigration, forget China, forget all of that. Look at his behaviors and how he sells out America's interests to Israel. How he pushes for war and conflict that favors Israel. How he breaks with everyone in the past, despite the backlash, the public backlash. He is willing to suffer that, which is what he hates more than anything else, public ridicule. He's willing to take the criticism to do these things for Benjamin Netanyahu. Why is that? It really suggests that President Trump has been compromised. Can't say it for sure, but we can take a guess, right? Now, like I said earlier, when the UN first outlined the division of this land, the partitioning of the land of Palestine, the British mandate at that time, the Palestinians still had control of slightly more land than Israel. And that is because the Palestinians outnumbered the Jews in the land. So they get more territory. And they correctly made the point, this is the land we have lived on. It is not yours, United Nations, or Neville Chamberlain, or anybody else, to split up and give to the Zionists. It is not your land to give. Now let's jump over to Google Earth and talk just a little bit about what this means, what this led to. So this bad Let me see here. Let me bring this up. Let me go close a browser here. All right, so this led to the 1949 war. When the war was over, a green line was established. On Google Earth, it shows it in red, but it's called the Green Line. This line here and over in Gaza, this was never considered an official boundary of the Palestinian territory. It was supposed to be a temporary ceasefire line. That was the extent of it. But over time, these lines became locked in by Israel's military. Now, as the Palestinian natives did not have a state of their own, the neighboring state of Jordan, Amman, you may, if you're familiar with the Bible and you hear about the Israelites fighting with the Ammonites, Amman, Jordan. That's where over here on the eastern side of the Jordan, that's where they're from. So Jordan goes in and they take control of East Jerusalem as well as territory over here on behalf of the Palestinians who really didn't have the means to fight. If we look here, this area here, the West Bank, anciently this was called Samaria. At least in the Bible, it's referred to as Samaria. Jordan, though, called it the West Bank because it is on the western side of the Jordan River, which runs between Jordan and Palestine. Well, this land division remained in place until 1967, and that's when Israel launched their attack. They took the Sinai, they took the Golan Heights up here, and so forth. So when Israel took control of the West Bank in 1967, Jordan had to decide what to do because they were outgunned by Israel. They had no hope of fighting back and taking this militarily, taking it back from Israel. Not because Israel was so powerful, but because Israel had the backing of the imperialist Anglo-American Empire, the greatest empire in world history. So they couldn't hope to drive Israel out through war. So this leaves Israel with the upper hand. Israel gets to set the terms. They get to decide what to do because they have the power in this situation. So like I said, under pressure, international pressure, they gave the Sinai back to Egypt, and it was over here in these waters is where the Liberty was attacked, off the coast of Egypt. But they give that back. What do we do with the West Bank? The Jews they had some options here. They could formally annex the territory for themselves and say, guess what? This is now ours. We own it outright. That's it. This is Israel. But as they saw with the Sinai issue, this would certainly draw massive international fury. So they can't do that and get away with it. Next option, they could withdraw their military from the West Bank and they could let Jordan come back in and reassume control. That's option 2. Option number 3 is they could say, forget Jordan and cut Jordan out, and instead take the West Bank and Gaza and give control of that over to the Palestinians to create a state for themselves. Now, those are the 3 main choices, but rather than take any of those actions, what Israel chose to do was to violate international law and continue its occupation. And like I said, it was also a violation of Israeli court rulings that had repeatedly said that the military occupation of Palestinian territories, it could only be justified if the occupation was temporary in nature until major hostilities were over, and that there was no justification for settlers, Jewish settlers, to go in and take control. These were Israeli court rulings. No transfer of the Jewish population into the territories was deemed legal. But that's exactly what took place. That's what they did. Let me bring my screen back up here. So as of 1967, that's where we're at in our timeline. Swarms of Israelis flooded into the West Bank. They began to establish these colonial settlements. And it really was reminiscent of how the British settlers, and also the French, but primarily the British and later British turned American colonialists, how they pushed further west and further west, displacing the Native Americans, pushing them off their lands, and then establishing their own settlements, and then fortifying those settlements, and then from there expanding and pushing the Native Americans even further into the West, until finally there's like, you know what, let's just take everybody and march them on the Trail of Tears. And so this is very similar. So it wasn't just random lands, though. If we were to go back, do I have a? Let me see here. I've got another picture here. Hold on a second. I want to show you this. You may not be able to tell real well from these photos, but it'll give you a little idea of the Jewish settlements. I'll wait. I'll just do that. I'll do that in a minute, because it's not super detailed anyway. But when they went in, the Jews didn't just go into random places. They went into the best parts of the Palestinian territories. They went in where the land was the most fertile, where it was most likely that they could grow crops, pushing Palestinian farmers out of the way, displacing them, and taking control of the green parts, because so much of it is arid land out there. They took control of the areas where there were natural resources. For example, water. To this day, Israel diverts the Jordan River, which used to supply water for electricity and things like that to the Palestinians. That now is under Israeli control, even in the West Bank areas. And water is rationed. 4 days a week, the Palestinians in the West Bank get water. And so that's why they have the big water, what do you call them? Receptacles, water, I forget what they're called. The towers on top of their homes to hold the water, so that they can have some water in the days that Israel turns the spigots off to the Palestinians. Of course, in those same West Bank territories, the Jewish settlers in the West Bank, they have water 24/7, 7 days a week, any time of the day, no restrictions. So they go in and they're robbing the Palestinians of the best parts of the land. So this settlement activity was plainly illegal. And the world's leaders confirmed their opposition, their ongoing opposition to these settlements, by producing UN Security Council resolutions, including 446. Let me read you a paragraph from that. Resolution 446 states, in part, that the international community, quote, determines that the policy and practices of Israel in establishing settlements in the Palestinian and other Arab territories occupied since 1967 have no legal validity and constitute a serious obstruction to achieving a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East. And the resolution further states that the UN, quote, strongly deplores the failure of Israel to abide by Security Council resolutions. And they list them: 1967, 1968, 1971, 1976, on and on and on. They say, we have condemned you over and over and over. But the United Nations is, they don't actually have teeth. They can't enforce very much. I've seen a lot of this occupation up close. I'll just show you one or two quick photos. One of these days I need to really go through my pictures from the trip and show you a lot of it. But I have seen this occupation up close. If I remember right, this was in Bethlehem. I'm thinking this was in Bethlehem. But anyway, I've traveled through these checkpoints that they've got all over the place. So they've got, like, for example, this apartheid wall. Checkpoints everywhere. I mean, they're like cattle. They treat the Palestinians like cattle, forcing them through these cages and checkpoints. It's insane. You've got Israeli soldiers everywhere, and they're there to prevent the Palestinians from being able to take back their land. You go to cities like Hebron, which is where Abraham is buried, and you've got more Israeli soldiers in Hebron than you have Jewish settlers, because that is how much effort that Israel puts into stopping the Palestinians from regaining their lands. They're determined not to let it happen. Let me show you one more picture here. I was talking earlier about the 1967 Six-Day War. This is, I think this is the Jaffa Gate. This is one of the gates leading into the Old City in East Jerusalem. And you can see all of these holes. These are bullet holes. This is from when the Jews stormed in to take control of East Jerusalem. And I got to talk to some people who were there at the time. They were young, but they remember it, the whole thing. So anyway, in 2005, and I remember this quite well, when Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon was in power, the Jewish settlements in Gaza were dismantled, which was a good thing in a way, because they were starting to take over Gaza as well. But they pulled the settlers out, which is one of the rare times that you see. Normally you see photo after thousands and thousands of photos of Israelis going into Palestinian homes and pulling the people out and then demolishing their homes, or turning around and putting Jews into their homes. But 2005 was pretty much the only time where we saw the Israeli government go in and pull Jews out of some of these illegal settlements. There's some pictures online of that. But they became, the Jews that left and the rest of the Jews, they became indignant over this. So rather than just say, okay, I guess it's not a good thing to expand settlements, what they did was they dramatically escalated settlement building in the West Bank. Fine, if we can't be in Gaza, we'll just go take more land from the West Bank. And that's what they did. They've got control of the water, they've got control of the roads, they've got control of the resources. But it was really when Donald Trump became president that the settlement building took this, I mean, it skyrocketed, took off, because he was the first president to basically greenlight the settlement building. So as it stands, the reality of the situation there in Palestine, in the West Bank, is that these settlements are so entrenched, they are so expansive, they are so well guarded by the Israeli military, And the Israeli government has, I mean, they've put it into overdrive. They've got the gas pedal to the floor. They're not slowing down. So as it is, it looks really bad. The prospects for the Palestinians, it fills some of them with a sense of hopelessness. If the entire international community can pass resolution after resolution after resolution condemning Israel for this, and nothing happens to reverse it, what can we do? And that's why you have, for example, in Gaza, where they're trapped like fish in a barrel, you've got them engaging in the weekly protests that have been going on. And they have a right to. We would certainly do that here in the United States. And historically, we've got the historical precedent to know what our founders, the founding generation did when the British came in and tried to crack down on us. We took up arms. The problem is the Palestinians don't have guns. The common people don't have weapons. They have rocks. Rocks don't do a heck of a lot against tanks. And that is why we here in the United States, and I understand my friends in Europe look at us like, oh, you crazy Americans and your guns. I get it. But this is the very reason that the founding fathers said the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. It was not so that generations later, everybody would have the right to go hunting deer. It was not so that you could just pull out a gun and defend your home. The main reason that the founding fathers said that the right to bear arms will not be infringed is because you have to maintain a militia. What is a militia? As defined by the founders themselves, the militia was the entire body of the people. There was no standing army in peacetime to protect the people. So it was the duty of the people to remain armed and capable of pushing back against a tyrannical government that sought to take control of their rights and usurp their rights and oppress them. Think how different things would be in Palestine today if the majority of the families there had guns. Be a very different picture. I'm not advocating violence, but if people are coming in, killing you, or trying to kill you, trying to kill your children, dragging them off in the middle of the night to some gulag, taking you out of your homes and your lands, trying to, engaging in ethnic cleansing. If that's the case, pull out that gun and defend yourself. So this is crazy. Now, I'm kind of at the halfway point here. We're at 48 minutes.
If you appreciate hard-hitting investigative journalism that you won't get from the mainstream media, then please support Jake's research and analysis at patreon.com/endtimesnewsreport, paypal.me/endtimesnewsreport, or send a check or money order to Jake Morphonios, P.O. Box 1333, Kernersville, North Carolina 27285.